Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Compassion and Therapy Summit. My name's Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network, and it's my pleasure to welcome you back to the final day of the summit. This was produced in partnership with the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And through this event, over 67,000 therapists and mental health professionals have all come together from over 90 countries around the world. It's been so inspiring to read all of your comments and feel your inspiration to bring more compassion into how we practice therapy and into our world altogether. So thank you for bringing your hearts to the summit and making such a rich 5 days. We'd love to hear from you, who you are as we're joining this call. If you want to enter your name and where you're tuning in from in the chat section or the comment section, depending on where you're watching from, it'd be great to see you and meet you for this event. And today we're delighted to be hosting our live closing keynote with Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman, and hosted by Chris Germer. As we begin, it's wonderful to get a feeling of who's present. So again, go ahead and introduce yourself. And Jack, Trudy, and Chris, I wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. You've been visionary pioneers in helping us bring more mindfulness and compassion into our modern society and demonstrating how we can live our lives with heart. It's such an honor, really, to have you here today.
Thank you.
And so before we get started, I wanted to say that we have an opportunity for live Q&A at the end of this call. I'll be coming back on to give more instructions about that later. But in the meantime, if you have questions that arise now or throughout the session, feel free to write them in the comments section or the chat, and we'll be looking for some of those to be going over later on the call. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Germer. Chris is a clinical psychologist and lecturer on psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. Along with Kristen Neff, he co-created the Mindful Self-Compassion program and has been at the forefront of the movement to bring mindfulness, self-compassion, and compassion into psychotherapy. On a personal note, it's been a delight to work with you, Chris, throughout the summit, and for all of your insight and care along the way. And I'm so happy to introduce you today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kaylee, and thanks to you and your team for putting together a truly remarkable and groundbreaking conference. And it's a special treat for me to speak with Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman today. They, of course, don't need any introduction, and they also asked me to keep the introductions as brief as possible. So I'm going to try to do that, maybe adding a personal note, and that is that Trudy and I were part of a group that founded the Institute for Meditation and Psychotherapy back in the 1980s, when Trudy was the guiding teacher of that group before she went off to Inside LA to start Inside LA in Los Angeles. And Trudy's been a dear friend all these years and really a beacon of clarity and fun. And you also probably need to know that Trudy is the voice of Trudy the Love Barbarian on the popular Netflix series Midnight Gospel, episode 4, which I saw a half hour ago. And Jack,
that's the high point of her career, by the way. Really.
It is the trippiest thing I've ever seen. Anyhow, wonderful to have you, Trudy, and Jack. Is just so great for you to be here as well. Jack, also no introduction needed. Jack is Jack, and his luminous transmission of Buddhist psychology and practice has changed millions of lives, and definitely my own as well. So it's such an honor, and welcome, Jack. And
it's mutual. You and Kristen together, you've just done such fabulous work, and I just feel like we're somehow brothers, sisters in this very fortunate work of bringing compassion alive at a time we need it.
Well, thank you, and your support means a ton to us and to me personally. Thank you. Yeah, so we're now at the end of really a thrilling 4-day conference on compassion in therapy, and in which we explored compassionate presence in therapy, what a compassionate relationship looks like, and also compassionate home practices. So today, in this final session of our summit, we'd like to explore compassion as a way of life. So as therapists, we have our treatment models and methods and protocols, but in order to bring compassion into therapy, we have to embody it in our lives. And so who better to explore this topic with than you both, Trudy and Jack. So for starters, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share. I might ask a few cheeky questions during this time we have together. So for starters, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share in your own lives who you've worked with, who you consider exemplars of compassion, and also what you think we can learn from them.
So I'll start out. I chose two people to, I thought about this question, which you kindly, let us know about. And the first person that I've worked really closely with was not in a psychotherapy setting, but is my friend Pepe Rodriguez. And Pepe and I have worked together at Inside LA. He has been responsible for all of our maintenance and keeping our centers clean and all of that. And he's also attends the teachings and has trained to become a mindfulness teacher himself. And what inspires me about Pepe is that he's from Mexico, but he's lived, a long time in this country. And what he is like is everybody he meets becomes his friend. And it's not just saying the words, amigo or my friend. He says it and he means it. He takes time to connect warmly with everybody. And sometimes I'll lose my patience and say, blah, 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 so-and-so. He always comes back to that person's best intentions, what they were trying to do. He doesn't focus on where they fell down or didn't do it. And if they totally blew it, then he always has this take on it that is just so understanding. And he reminds me of, and so I've learned about just unhesitating friendliness to all. Everyone becomes his friend. Everyone who's at a cash register, everyone who, there's a quote from a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Longchenpa, and it says, out of the soil of friendliness grows the beautiful bloom of compassion. And I've really watched that embodied by Pepe. And then the other person was my Zen teacher, Maureen Stewart Roshi. And Maureen was actually almost fierce, quite a stern presence, a really kind of traditional Zen teacher, except for being a female. And her compassion manifested in a very different way through her patience. She was so patient. And she really taught me that patience is an element of compassion. And that's something that I really need to work on endlessly throughout my life, is being patient. And that sometimes compassion is just a very slow, steady presence.
Thank you, Trudy. Jack, love to hear from you.
So the person that first comes to mind is somebody that was a close friend and teacher and a colleague and a remarkable being, a Cambodian man named Mahagosananda. I lived with him in the forest monasteries of Thailand when we were monks together. And he was this great scholar who spoke 15 languages. But after the genocide in Cambodia, when so many people were killed under the Khmer Rouge, he was saved because he was out of the country. All 19 members of his family were killed. And he went to the refugee camps, and I went with him at one point to try to help these people, and asked the UN, can I open a temple in the middle of the camps? And they gave permission, kind of platform and whatever. But the Khmer Rouge underground said that if anyone goes to hear this monk speak, they'll be killed when they go back. They were trying to eliminate all of the intellectuals. And we rang the bell through the camp, and to our surprise, 25, 30,000 people all came anyway out of this, that morning. And I thought, what can he say? And he looked out, and all these people's faces were the faces of trauma. a grandmother and 2 surviving grandchildren out of 8. Everybody else was killed. The families that had lost so much. And he put his hands together. He sat very quietly for a long time. And then he began to chant in Cambodian and in Pali or Sanskrit, the ancient language, this simple verse: hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And as he chanted it, these were chants that people hadn't heard in years because everything was burned and the temples destroyed. They began to chant it with him. And I felt that he was speaking a truth that was even bigger than their suffering, that no matter what you and we have been through, there is a reality that is greater than this. And I want to remind you that this is your heritage, both within the Cambodian culture, the Buddhist, but really your heritage as a noble human being. And then he spent the next 15 years before he was nominated for the Nobel Prize many times, leading peace walks through the killing fields and the minefields to bring people back to their village with loving kindness. So I think about him, and the thing about him, like Trudy talked about, was he was gentle, and he was completely present, quite gentle, and quite humble. So there was he just cared about the people that he met, and that was it. There was no big story about it, and it touches me every time I think of him. And Trudy knew him too, so we were all kind of in this together.
Such an unassuming person, so humble. Yeah.
So as you were speaking, Jack, I was thinking that part of the power of his words was probably because he was in the midst of so much suffering, you know, that it was actually received like nectar, you know. And then I was thinking about the role of therapists. You know, we spend all day long in suffering, you know, and just how powerful love and, you know, love and compassion is a powerful resource. But, you know, as you were speaking, I was just thinking it's probably more powerful in therapy because that's where people bring their pain so much, you know. So in that context, I'm wondering also, you know, mindfulness. When Trudy and I started in this work in like 1985, literally, right, Trudy, people were saying, what's mindfulness? We'd have to define it, you know?
Yeah.
and now it's a dominant paradigm, and compassion is really following on the heels of mindfulness. I'm wondering whether either of you would be willing to say something about the relationship of compassion to mindfulness and awareness itself. Something about the integration, you know?
Yeah, no, I'll start. I mean, you know, mindfulness, I was really, when I reflect on this, Chris, what I feel is that, you know, for me, mindfulness, immersed in the body, mindfulness connected to a sense of the presence, physical being, is, it could be called the fountain of all wise states, including compassion. And that quality of mindfulness, when it's anchored in a sense of presence of the body, it's, you know, it's upright, it's stable, it's grounded, and it's anchored in valuing ourselves, valuing our presence. And that valuing, the word, you know, is punya, that valuing is, that's compassion too. And so I feel like that movement, when we're practicing mindfulness and being aware, whenever we let a thought go, whenever we don't believe a thought, whenever we free our heart from being caught in these different mind states, that's an act of compassion right there. And that seeing things clearly, you know, having that attitude of why are we practicing mindfulness? We want to find out where we get out of our suffering, right? And we want to find out, you know, how how do we do it? And yeah, so I think that for me, the way they come together, where mindfulness and compassion come together, is collecting in the body, like collecting our thoughts, collecting the presence of our hearts. And that's where composure, the steadiness of attention that we associate with developing mindfulness, the clarity, the ability to take responsibility for our own minds and the actions that come out of our minds and hearts. And I feel like this is how, you know, to everybody who's listening, this is how your love of your life and your love of life itself, and your compassionate sense of your own value translates into then action, altruism, healing, the work that you do. So that's kind of how I look at them. And there's a lot more to say, but I will let Jack say something.
Well, I'm just appreciating gathering and valuing as kind of the whole frame of the mindfulness enterprise, how profoundly compassionate that is. Yeah. Yeah. What are you thinking, Jack?
So I want to bring in a little bit of history, which you are a part of and Trudy's a part of as well. And that is that when some of us first started bringing mindfulness practices and teachings in the 1970s back from our training in various parts of Asia, there was a way in which the mindfulness, people picked it up and began to practice, had a subtle quality of sternness or judgment in it. All right, I can see this. I see the, you know, the angry mind, or I see my fear, or so forth. But with it, there was also this notion that somehow I could be better than I am. You know, it's built into us in some fashion. And so that the observation of mindfulness to become present and noticed could get tainted in some way by either ambition or judgment or self-judgment. And you know about that famous meeting we had with the Dalai Lama in the 80s saying, what do we do about all the self-hatred that we're finding in students? And he couldn't understand that because there wasn't a word for it in Tibetan. It took him a while to, what does that word mean? And then he said, finally, but this is a mistake. Why would anyone do that? I said, okay, well, Chris and Kristen will develop a practice of a training for mindful self-compassion to help people. But what we learned pretty early on in teaching in the European and North American culture, primarily our white culture, which it was then hopefully, and more now it's become truly somewhat more diverse, was how mindfulness could be misused unconsciously. And so we then began very deliberately to weave in loving kindness and compassion, and I'll put them kind of together with mindfulness because they're critical as a therapist or as a person tending to your own body, heart, and mind, to pay attention in a way that leads to freedom requires that attention be loving. If it doesn't have love in it, it becomes distant or cold or potentially judging. But with the quality of love, and Ram Dass's phrase for mindfulness, which we've adopted, is loving awareness, is mindful loving awareness. When that's there, then we can be both present for this mystery of life, and it can be received in a field of compassion or love. And Ram Dass, you know, who's been a big inspiration for us, says the greatest thing you can do for another being is to provide that unconditional love that comes from making contact with that place in them that's beyond all the changing conditions, which is just pure consciousness, pure essence. Everything transforms when we identify with being the loving awareness to the story instead of the actor. And in India and places where Ram Dass and we studied, there's a description of what it means to be seen that way by a guru or a master or a teacher, whoever she or he is. But it's really true for us as therapists. It's called the glance of mercy, that somebody can look at you with eyes of so much understanding or compassion or love for all the drama of your life and suffering and mistakes and successes, and to see you beyond that, to see your essence. And that changes everything. And to be able to see that secret beauty in another, in a way, that's all, that's what therapy, that's the ground of it. And this, then your work so beautifully is, can we hold ourselves that way?
Yeah, as you're speaking, empathy has had has always been so important in the conversation about psychotherapy and as well as the research. But wow, what would it be like if our clients all experienced the glance of mercy in session? It brings tears to my eyes just thinking about it.
Yes.
What would it be like if we could hold all of our clients in the glance of mercy?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's probably what the entire conference is about in the end.
Yeah. 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 So you guys teach a lot together, as you are right now, and it's such a joy to be sharing this space with you. But I know from teaching, there are sometimes edges in it, and we happen to have edges as humans. I'm just wondering if you'd be willing, this is like one of two cheeky questions I have, if you'd be willing to share a little bit in your teaching ventures how compassion comes in.
Okay, well, I actually will. I'll start with that. Yeah, so in teaching ventures, I'm going to tell a story that comes from teaching that I did for around 10 years with a colleague, Chris, named Catherine Klatzker, who was a pediatric nurse in the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, the PICU, we call it. And Catherine and I led day-long retreats on mindfulness and being with death and dying. So of course, compassion was a big piece of that. And, it was in those days, it was really needed because there was no way for people to grieve the repeated losses that happened. You had to rush to the bedside of the next patient. And today with COVID, of course, this is amplified so many times. As a result of our work over these many years, which has continued, we created it was called, you would love this, Chris. It was called the Fearless Compassionate Care Training for others, caregivers, who work at the bedside of critically ill and dying children and later adults too, we included. And I want to read you a poem that Catherine wrote recently during the pandemic. She's retired, but as a nurse, she's so aware of how it is, and she's still connected with her friends in the pediatric intensive care unit. And she wrote this poem called View Out My Window, and it is the best response I have, really. She said, the worst thing is she died alone, as so many do these days, isolated from all who love her. In pandemic, we are globally unprepared for this novel anguish. There's nothing outside in the gray evening, nothing outside my window to distract me from the memories of dying patients, how we used to use our lunch breaks to hold and rock the little ones who had no families so they would not feel abandoned. I jolt up in the night, sleepless again. I look up at the sky ablaze, scattered starlight undimmed by light pollution for once, and I remember how we were, what we did all those years in intensive care. I recall singing to patients as their pallor deepened, their breath agonal, watching for signs of pain, wishing they were not separated from all who loved them, realizing they were not. She did not die alone. This I know. Oh, makes me. A nurse held her hand. A nurse spoke steadily and softly to her. A nurse told her of those who love her and longed to be at her side. This I know as I fall into the arms of sleep. So this is about a nurse, but psychotherapists hold, hold and hug, at least metaphorically, those who come to consult with us. And yeah, that's how it manifests. One way, one of the many ways it manifests in our work.
Yeah, and I also think probably we don't give ourselves enough credit for all the holding we do, all the loving we do, all the connection we provide, because it always feels like not enough, you know? Yeah. So thank you for highlighting that.
And one of the things that, Trudy, that you told me that was so moving about this, and that people will understand just what you're pointing to, Chris, is that, and I found it in working with vets returning, especially combat vets, it's the same thing, that you can't tell your stories to civilians, or you can't come home from holding, you know, every day children, one portion of whom die, and tell your family, and people don't understand. So as they created their retreats for the medical people, the nurses and doctors, it was often the first time that they had a place where they could just tell the stories of all those who they held, and have them be really witnessed and heard and held in the shared arms of compassion.
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yeah. It's not dinner table conversation, you know.
Yeah.
and we therapists get isolated in the same way, just as you said.
Yeah. Oof, yeah. Yeah. So I don't feel like asking my second cheeky question, but I have a question that's really burning. And that is, and not just in my heart, but in the world. And that is that our culture seems to have woken up to social and systemic injustice a lot in the last year, such as racism, and we have so much work to do. I'm wondering if you would be willing to share some of your thoughts about the role of compassion in dealing with systemic injustice.
Start now.
Oh, sure, I'll start. I also want to acknowledge how deep this question is. And it's partly deep for the profound moment we are in culturally and globally with reckoning with the centuries of racism and caste and colonialism and those kinds of oppressions, together with and not separate from climate change and economic disparity and all those other things that kind of fit together with it. And they're really talking about an enormous amount of pain, because people have, on one side, have been disenfranchised and made to suffer in all kinds of terrible ways, and in others who've been cut off, really. I heard yesterday, Trudy and I were talking with Tristan Harris from the Center for Humane Technology about how to use technology to begin to bridge the divide. And he used this phrase of the divisiveness. He's talked about Wokistan and Magistan, and how different, how far apart those two they are. The truth is that we're all suffering. And people, no matter where you are, if you wake up to, we're all vulnerable. And we tend our vulnerability in different ways. James Baldwin said that, he said, I imagine one of the reasons that people cling to their hate and prejudice so stubbornly is they sense that once hate is gone, they'll be forced to deal with their own fear and pain. And this is really at the heart of your question, that what divides us outwardly is also our fears.
And our pain.
And our pain.
Yeah.
And when we teach our children that there's a way to hold their emotions, their fear, their anger, their pain, as we know in social emotional learning and things like that are grown, which is all the elements of compassion. We're putting medicine somewhere at the root of this systemic problem. It's hard to overemphasize the suffering from racism. It's the core wound of our culture in many ways. And the economic and all the other kind of educational problems, a lot of it fall out of that. To turn toward it, the only way we can bear it is compassion for how much it's cost us and others, and how much struggle we're in, and how different people think, and how frightened we are. We're all in suffering together. And if we have some sense of shared compassion for this and our shared human vulnerability, then maybe we can move forward.
You know, following on what, on the James Baldwin quote, particularly to make it a little more specific, I found a quote from an African-American, I think he's a psychologist, Kenneth Clark, and he told this is in 1965, okay? He told the readers of Ebony magazine, which for those of you not from our country, Ebony magazine was a magazine devoted to African-American life, that if Blacks were indeed to obtain equal rights, it would be a psychological calamity for the average American white, as they would have to find other scapegoats or to face again the intolerable state of their own hearts. Another way of saying what James Baldwin said. But honestly, you know, we're trying to do this sort of this psychological reckoning as a nation, and certainly at our centers, our meditation centers, and, you know, be good, cultivate anti-racism, and it's really hard. And it's really painful. I mean, we're going through it right now, you know, at Insight LA, really trying, you know, it's not just about empathic listening to Black Americans. It's also finding ways to promote change in our communities. And that means not replicating the power structures and the privileging of the majority, you know, all the patterns that have been developed. Racism is institutional. You know, it's not just an individual matter, it's structural in everything. Caste and racism, yeah, at the heart of this particular time in our culture. And I want to recommend a book that I found really illuminating, and I think I told you about it, Chris, Caste by Isabel Wilkerson.
Yeah, I had the privilege of reading it. It's an astonishing book, yes.
Yeah, and maybe Stephen or Kaylee, who's ever putting things in the chat, Megan can put that. It's Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. And, you know, the role of compassion, I really see it for myself, is in counteracting the white fragility, the reactivity that I get around, you know, trying to tackle some of the shame and awkwardness and guilt and the other painful feelings that come up when we look deeply into our history. You know, we desperately need what you teach. We desperately need the self-compassion and soothing to be able to fortify our hearts to do this work.
I also think this is just a tiny little practice to put out there, both personally and collectively, because you're really talking about how do we strengthen our hearts so that we can actually face this level of collective suffering. When I was going through the most difficult part of my divorce, you know, a decade ago, and going in to meet with the lawyers, and it was really painful at times, kind of agonizing and upsetting, and all those things that people who've been through this know. I would put on one side, on my right hand, I'd have the Buddha, and on my left hand, I'd have Kuan Yin, the goddess of infinite compassion. And I wanted the clarity and the steadiness of the Buddha, and the, you know, the compassion of Kuan Yin. I said, okay, I need you to help keep me steady in this. And in this other work, I might put, you know, Martin Luther King in one hand, or Sojourner Truth in the other, and say, come be with me, because there's a way in which we can't do this alone. And yes, we need each other living with one another as community, but I also want to invite therapists and people listening that we are part of a lineage of people who carried awakening and compassion in difficult circumstances, and we can call on those. They are living in us and in our culture and in our minds and hearts and imagination. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. Yeah. So maybe one last question, maybe a couple more minutes we have. I think you've already answered this question, but maybe you have another thought. And that is, what do you think allows us to see?
I'm just writing a quote for someone who asked for it.
What allows us to see with the eyes of compassion?
Part of it is to see the vulnerability in every human being, that the poet Rilke said, ultimately, it's upon your vulnerability that you depend. That we're actually vulnerable all the time. We're vulnerable to lightning not striking, or, you know, we're vulnerable to one another, that when you go through a green light, that someone will stop at the red, or that the food you buy at the market was cared for and in a way that didn't spoil or won't poison you. We are vulnerable beings. And to see that vulnerability allows us to see with the eyes of compassion. That's one of the first things. And then a second is a kind of not knowing. So that Somerset Maugham said there are 3 rules for writing the great English novel.
I want to hear that.
What?
I
There
want
are
to hear that.
3 rules for writing the great English novel.
Don't get your hopes up, Chris.
Unfortunately, no one knows what they are. And there's something, you know, he's a brilliant writer, and there's something about our not knowing, our seeing each other's vulnerability and saying, here, I'm in an incarnation, you are too, aren't you? How's it going? You know, but here we are together in this. Trudy?
Yeah, I'm sorry for the distracting typing. Somebody asked for the quote and I was typing it in for them. So I apologize for that, but I wanted to offer it because I think it's a good quote. Yeah, you know, when you ask that question, I think so much of it is also innate in us as humans. And so it really depends on our upbringing, how, if that is fostered and encouraged. And, you know, as a sensitive child, I remember being 8 years old and sitting on the curb waiting for my dad to walk home from work. In those days, families, well, we certainly didn't have 2 cars. And this was what, the 50s, and long time ago. And the dads would get off the train station and then walk to their houses. And I remember watching them all and knowing which ones were going home to an unhappy house and which ones were going home to that house with the blinds shut. Susan's mother was an alcoholic. Which one, you know, I was looking for my dad, who was very upbeat, optimistic, happy kind of guy. But you know, just having that sensitivity as a child, I think so many children do. They see the grown-ups. Grown-ups can't bear actually being seen by children in that way. Their openness and vulnerability to who we are, it's hard to bear. And so I think a lot of it, to me, has to do with parents having done their own work so that they can actually bear being seen in all of who they are. And that allows the children's own compassion to naturally blossom because it's there.
It's there. It's there. And I remember you and I, Trudy, were once just talking about how we're still innocent, you know, or as Jack might say, we're still vulnerable. We're still innocent. We still don't know. You know, this is all still true, although there are layers of conditioning all over it, you know. And it's the same with our clients, right? It's still true. They may be mad. They may have all, you know, it may get pretty dramatic in the session, but, you know, they're vulnerable. They're innocent. They don't know. We're working it out.
There's an inviolable child of the spirit underneath in each one. And when we talk about seeing with the glance of mercy or the eyes of compassion, when we can tune in and see that under all the screens, that was that child that was born, that child of the spirit. That also helps us to really, not only to see them, but for them to be reflected, for them to know, remember who they really are.
Oh, so I wonder whether you would be willing, I think Trudy said Jack would like to share a practice. If you'd be willing to take 10 minutes and share a practice with us, Jack, before we go into Q&A, is that okay?
I'm happy to share a practice, yeah. Trudy told you, she said, Jack, I want you to do the practice.
Oh, that's how that works.
That's how it actually works.
She sent me an email and said, yay, Jack's going to do it.
But it wasn't because I actually love doing those practices. It's because I really feel like with all the people from all over the world, you know, they know Jack through his books, and I want them to have a chance to experience Jack leading the meditation.
It was so generous of you.
It was.
It was. I know.
Truly.
Truly.
No, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it. So
Yeah,
let's,
I hope so.
let's go for it.
All right. So
We have compassion for each other, Chris.
We do. And what I love, and in our marriage, it's been really important to me, is that in those occasional and rare moments where I might get a little frustrated or irritated or judgmental, very, very, very rare, mind you, but should it possibly, since we are meditation teachers, right? Should it possibly happen, I do an inner practice of seeing Trudy as a girl, you know, because she has this joyful spirit anyway, but seeing her as a teenage girl or as a young girl, and it's just so visible to me. And how could I not love and care for, and that all that irritation just goes out the window. So, all right. So we'll do a little practice. Invite people to close their eyes. Settle yourself wherever you are seated now. Feel your body resting on the earth, and how wherever you're seated, the earth can hold you and support you. Almost as if you have roots like a tree that go into the earth. You can take a moment to steady yourself. Now that you steady yourself a bit, coming here into the present, become aware of the whole sense of your body. Feel your body, a field of sensations, warm and cool, and ease and tension, and hard and soft. And as you feel the state of your body right now, with loving awareness, notice also how much your body has been carrying lately. The weight or the tension, the struggles you may have in your life, the physical dilemmas, all that your body carries. And then imagine, just like you could wrap yourself with the most gentle blanket, or some loving being could put their arms around you. There you were, maybe even as a child, and a loving being could wrap their arms around you. That you could wrap your own body with arms of compassion for all it carries, a tenderness and a care right now. And notice what happens as you hold all that the body's carrying with compassion and kindness. And say to your body, thank you. Thank you for caring so much. Thank you for caring so much. I'm okay just now. You can relax. I'm okay just now. And notice what happens when you add the thank you and compassion. And invite your body to relax and know that you're okay just here and now. Now bring the same loving awareness to your heart. Your heart, which carries so many things: longing and love, fear and hurt, anger, boredom, frustration, delight. Your heart carries the pains of your life and the people you care about and the world around you. Carries your hopes, concerns, and feel how much your heart carries. And then imagine you can wrap your arms of compassion around your heart, tenderness and care for all that your heart carries, holding it so kindly, gratefully. And say thank you. Thank you for caring so much. This great heart within you that carries the world. Thank you for protecting me and caring so much. I'm okay just now. You can rest and relax. I'm okay just here. Notice what happens as you hold your heart with compassion and loving awareness of all that it carries. And say thank you for caring so much. I'm okay. Just now you can relax. Now bring your loving awareness to your mind, that beehive of thoughts and images, that busy planning and remembering and imagining and envisioning of pictures and words nonstop. And feel the energy of the mind, all its movement. And hold it with compassion. It tries so hard. Hold this mind with compassion, tenderness, and say thank you. Thank you for working so hard to protect me and plan. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. I'm okay for now. You can relax. I'm okay just now. Thank you. Let the mind soften and quiet. And notice how in doing this with body, heart, and mind, you've become the loving witness. You're not the body, you're not the emotions, you're not the thoughts. Who you are is this loving awareness itself, the compassionate witness to all that body, heart, and mind carry in this life, this incarnation. Rest in this loving awareness. It is who you really are. It is your true nature. It is home. A quick tour of mindfulness of the body, heart, mind, and the nature of mind, compassion, and awareness in 11 minutes. I'm sorry I went over by a minute.
Thank you, Jack. My heart says thank you. My heart says thank you back.
Pleasure, pleasure.
So now we're going to take some questions from the participants. So Kaylee, do you have anything you like to, some instructions about that?
Yeah, sure. So as we're going into the live Q&A section of the call, we're going to be bringing a couple people on to actually ask their questions with their camera and microphone enabled. So if you'd like to ask a question in this way, please write your question in the Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom. You'll need to be in Zoom in order to ask in this way. You'll see it says Q&A. It's different than the chat function. It might be at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, depending on your device. And at the beginning of your question, please write live in all caps so that we know that you're ready to come on with your functioning microphone and camera. Then write your name, where you're from, your professional specialty, and finally your question. And if we choose your question in about 5 minutes or so after we go through this first question, you'll hear me call your name and then you'll be brought on live right away. So please be ready. A window will pop up asking you to enable your video and audio, and you're going to click OK when that happens. So in the meantime, I have our first question is a written question. So we'll spend a few minutes going over this as folks are writing in their questions for us to choose someone to come on live. And so this question is actually from one of the other presenters in the summit. Dr. Eduardo Duran wrote in and asked, what about wrathful compassion? Trungpa Rinpoche talks a lot about idiot compassion. I see a lot of codependence disguised as compassion. Can you say something about wrathful compassion and idiot compassion?
Well, you know, I'm just going to say a couple of sentences, and Trudy has more to say. We're Americans. We know how to misuse anything. We can misuse compassion too. I'm just speaking from the territory of the Miwok in California, or that's the land that I'm on. Anything can be misused, you know, so mindfulness and compassion can be misused in ways that aren't really genuine or aren't really helpful. Idiot compassion, where you're, you know, not actually paying attention to circumstances. But there's a whole other story. There's a side to compassion that wrathful compassion points to. Trudy, you want to talk to that?
Well, first of all, I feel like I'm definitely an expert in idiot compassion and had to learn over painful years the difference between wise and idiot compassion. Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, idiot compassion, the difference is understanding that to be open to the train, you don't have to stand in front of the train. And you can still witness it go by and be very, you know, close to the train. In terms of wrathful compassion, you know, I think of that as tough love. the willingness to understand that sometimes having a strong boundary or setting a firm limit is compassionate. It might not look like it, but it is compassionate. And I think too of the movie with Ram Dass from years ago called Fierce Grace. And in that film, he's talking with people who've suffered, big, big losses. And wrathful compassion is something that life dishes out to us. We're beneficiaries of the compassion of trees, of air, of water, of soil. And also we have our mortality and the mortality of those we love. So I often think of life as wrathfully compassionate as well as full of blessing and grace.
Thank you. So we have our first live question ready here from Catherine. So Catherine is a mindfulness teacher in Ottawa, Canada. Catherine, you'll be seeing a question to enable your video and audio, and go ahead and click yes, and then we'll be bringing you on in just a moment. Let's see. Catherine, are you there with us yet? Okay, looks like she's coming on, and we'll be enabling her audio right about now. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Can you hear us? Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for
Don't
this.
worry about Amy.
Pardon?
How about
Sorry, Megan, you're not muted. We can hear you. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Catherine.
So thank you so much for the conference. I've learned so much. And I just recently graduated from the mindfulness teacher training program that Jack and Tara fabulously offered. And I've learned so much from both. And my question has to do with one of the books that we use in the course, The Clinician's Guide to Mindfulness. And it very specifically says in that textbook that to kind of forewarn students of mindfulness practice that mindfulness meditation practice is not therapy. So my question is, given your conference, how do we explain to students, when does the practice end and the therapy begin, and vice versa? I find, because I have students in the groups that have taken therapy with great therapists that practice mindfulness in the sessions, but then I have students who just want to practice mindfulness and they don't understand the difference, and it's very hard to see where the lines are blurred.
Yeah, well, there's some overlap for sure between them. And, Chris and I, one of our colleagues, Phil Arano, he looked at it in terms of sets, like here's psychotherapy, here's mindfulness practice, and there's areas of overlap. For example, learning to recognize and acknowledge our emotions. Being able to explore states of mind. This is something you do in meditation and in psychotherapy. But the biggest difference, I think, is the one where in psychotherapy, we really trace the content of our thoughts and experiences and emotions and the meaning. Whereas in meditation, we're looking at the whole process of how the mind works, how the mind gets lost in thought, what generates clarity and attentiveness. And so we're looking, it's more like an overview, that the loving awareness observes and has this overview. Whereas in psychotherapy, we're really working more with the content of the stories and the experiences of our lives. I mean, that's the simplest way that I would answer that, if it makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. So I guess I'm not a therapist, so it's hard for me to kind of pick that apart. But I suppose that in therapy, there is the difference is that there's more of the narrative, maybe?
Yes. Well, there's
of
more
the stories. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And you pay a different kind of attention to the narrative. Whereas in mindfulness, you might simply notice, oh, a narrative. In therapy, you're really looking at the origins of that narrative, how that narrative is causing you to behave in your life, or what it causes you to believe about yourself. Awareness is awareness. And so there's a lot of overlap between emotional, psychological awareness and more non-religious, but spiritual awareness. Do you want to add anything?
That makes sense.
I'm really glad you finished the program, and you've gotten yourself in some really good trouble now, because people are going to come to you with their stuff. And that's really what happens, whether you're a meditation teacher or a therapist. They bring, they bring their hopes and what's possible, and they bring their suffering. And you have a whole set of beautiful tools to use to help them. And sometimes you're going to want to say, oh, you also could use a good therapist to work on this, and to know that both are.
Yeah, and not to hesitate.
Thank you.
Not to hesitate to send somebody to therapy if they're really anxious,
Sure.
really depressed, and it's more than you feel you could. But anyway, congratulations for completing.
Thank you. It's a fantastic course. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And the conference is fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so we have our second question here is going to be from Amy Bai. So Amy, you'll see the option in just a moment to enable your video and audio, and go ahead and click yes. And looks like Amy's coming on in just a moment, and then you'll be able to ask your question. And Amy's tuning in from Sydney, Australia. See, Amy, we see that you're with us.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
you
Hi,
are.
hello.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Yeah. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can hear you. Welcome.
Yeah. I'm from Sydney, Australia. Greetings. So my question is to Jack is how the loving awareness arise in the gap of the mindfulness. So could you please detail about that?
How does loving awareness arise in the gap
of mindfulness?
I'm not quite sure that I understand your question. Can you tell me a little more of what makes you ask?
Yeah. So I'm a student of Acker. So he usually he usually says arising from above the thought. So I was curious about, you just said the loving awareness. Is that the same thing, arise above the thought? I mean, in the mindfulness, the gap, I mean, between two thoughts, in that present, or you can say in that stillness, we can arise the loving awareness. So how that happen?
It's a beautiful question. Thank you. There are different ways we can experience mindful, loving awareness. We can experience it as a field of awareness in the silence between thoughts, as you say, where there's just a presence, which is consciousness itself. We can also experience it as the field within which thoughts and emotions and so forth are arising, like clouds in the sky, if that makes sense. So that there may be a gap between thoughts and things go very silent, and you rest in that silence. And then a thought arises. It can even be a silly thought like, oh, I've been aware that there's no thoughts, or whatever. And that loving awareness notices both the stillness and it notices the forms that arise within it. And I suspect that's what Eckhart is pointing to. I certainly love and respect him a lot, so I imagine that it's close to what he's speaking of. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So you mean that loving awareness is the ultimate subject? Is that right?
The ultimate subject? Well,
yes.
Trudy.
In a way, it is.
That's great.
Because loving awareness is who you deeply are. It gets covered up with all our thinking and our concepts and our, everything about the mind. but loving awareness is who you most deeply are. So in the gap, in the stillness, that's what arises.
So can we say, ultimately, we are the loving awareness. Also, that what we truly are, that is the ocean of the loving awareness. Can we say that?
Yes.
So
You can.
yeah, so yeah, for the person I am, is just the drop of the loving awareness, the ocean. Can we say that?
Yes, it's beautiful what you're saying. You can definitely say that. It's a beautiful teaching. You could say the ocean of loving awareness. I see you have tankas behind you. So you know about the ocean of compassion. They're not two different oceans.
So we are both ocean and also the drop of the water. Is that correct?
Gorgeous,
Okay.
gorgeous. Thank you.
So much. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a third question coming in from Mark Stouffer. So Mark, you're going to see the option again to enable your video and audio. Please click yes, and then you'll be on with us and you can ask your question. And Mark is tuning in from Portland, Oregon. Looks like Mark's with us. Mark, if you can hear us, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me fine?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you for taking my question. It's an honor to just be present with both of you. As a counselor, I work with individuals with abilities, but from time to time, I will have a client that has been labeled with a personality disorder. And sometimes I notice within myself that I get activated. And after the session, I will do like a ho'oponopono sort of prayer after the client has left the space. And I guess my question is, in the topic of compassion and awareness and loving awareness, what strategies have you used in your life when you find yourself activated by a certain individual, whether it be in your practice or your personal life? And I'm very curious how you use maybe compassion or compassionate towards the people that could potentially activate you.
Well, I'll just tell you one story about, I worked as a psychotherapist for about 25 years in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I remember working with one child whose mother was very angry, and she had good reasons, but she would turn it on me. And sometimes the force of her rage, they would leave and I would just be filled, what you're talking about still. And honestly, what I would do in those times is just go outside, Mark, and find a tree and hug that tree and sob. That's what I needed to do. For me, also water, the water element, if I can get into a bath or a pool or the ocean, even better, that really helps. I do find that in those moments when I'm just really charged with that kind of reactivity, that's usually not the best time for seated meditation. That I need to either walk, I need to either move, immerse myself, find a tree. I definitely feel the compassion that comes from the earth, lying on the ground. Maybe now in Maine, you wouldn't be doing that, but lying on you don't even have to be outdoors. You can just feel it coming up from the earth. The compassion that nature offers to us is so vast and immense. And for me, that's a huge help in those crunch moments you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Trudy said a lot of it, and it might be at some point, I go outside, I run around, I take a shower, or I change the venue and I go and I cook something, and first I chop a lot and I kind of let out whether it's the aggression or the tears or something. I also have suggested for some therapists, and I did it, and I had an altar. And so behind me, it wasn't just me, but I had backup. And when that person left, I could say, all right, Buddha, my teachers, all those, you carry this. This is too much for me, because it's not right for you to carry it in your body. And that in some deep way, you're really the vessel for something greater. to hold that person. But more than anything, I just want to respect the depth of the work that you do at that point. And that it's talk about fierce compassion. It's a kind of brave compassion to be able to be in the presence and then to care for your own body and spirit while you do.
Thank you so much. Those were beautiful answers to the questions. And I love the idea of movement and hugging a tree. Thank you so much.
I almost said get a bottle of scotch, but I really didn't want to say that, and it's wrong.
No, no.
But I almost said it just because the impulse is like, how do I get a, but there are really skillful ways to do it, which is what Trudy and I have been talking about.
And I think people are probably going to offer you also some words in the chat, Mark. So check there too and see what others have to say, because everyone's a therapist. There's so much wisdom, and everybody has different ways of, expanding our hearts so that we can hold more and more of the suffering without drowning it, getting lost in it.
And I have to fix what I just said, because I don't even actually drink. But there's a certain danger, because if we don't answer your question in ourselves, then we will turn to things to numb ourselves because we can't bear it. So it's actually a danger in our profession. And so at the depth of your question is something that's really also a safeguard for us as a whole in what we do. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and check the chat, Mark.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mark. And so thank you all for your wonderful questions. It looks like we're coming to the end of our time together tonight. And so Jack, Trudy, and Chris, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights and deeply compassionate hearts with us tonight. And are there any final words that you'd like to leave us with this evening?
I guess I would just like to say how much respect I have and how much I really treasure anybody who is interested in this subject and who comes to a conference like this and works with the suffering of so many beings in this world. I just want to thank everybody who's listening for your work and for your beautiful hearts that are compassionate and long to strengthen and deepen that compassion. So yeah, thank you everybody for who you are and what you do.
And I'll just add that as I listen to you, Trudy, I can almost feel that we could be sensing that we're holding hands together, that actually there's thousands of us together saying we have the capacity to hold the tears of the world and the beauty of the world for those who are going through difficult times, and that we join ourselves together as a community, and that we can share that strength. So
I guess one small thing I would add, which comes from a question we didn't answer that came to the chat, which was about compassion and technology. And I would just want to invite everybody to make sure that you have seen the documentary film, The Social Media, the Social Dilemma, because it addresses the problem of social media and how it does not really cultivate compassion in our world. So thank you.
Yeah, and I can just say, echoing what was said about community and presence, that in these last 4 days, we've really 5 days, we have created a community. 70,000 people have come together around the world with this common purpose, and what an honor it is for each and every one of us to participate in this. This is it's a brief life. How often do we get to do this kind of thing? And I just hope that we can connect in other ways going forward. And in that context, profound gratitude to Kaylee and her team at the Awake Network, because it was just an extraordinary achievement what you did. And thank you. Thank you, Trudy. Yeah. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. And with that, thank you to everyone for bringing your energy and inspiration to this summit through the last 5 days. It's been so powerful to feel this sense of community coming together from around the globe. And while we're closing the summit today, I feel like in many ways, this is just the beginning. And I hope that we'll be able to continue to gather through future events like this and continue to learn and deepen our explorations together. So in particular, I also wanted to highlight that we'll have an event coming up on February 17th, which will be another live Zoom call with Chris Germer and Kristen Neff. And in that call, we'll be hearing some of their insights on how to integrate self-compassion specifically into clinical practice and hearing about their new in-depth training program, specifically designed for psychotherapists. So we'll be sending out more information about that soon. And in the meantime, stay safe, and we look forward to connecting with you all soon. Take care.